and there was always something about Peter. He was a bit of an Icarus figure, and he sailed close to, in this case, a dangerous sun, in the case of Epstein. But we're going to start with the news this morning that the Prime Minister has asked the Foreign Secretary to withdraw from Peter Mandelson the position of Ambassador to America. I was on Good Morning Britain this morning with them.
I mean, you should say that's exactly how they've put it. What you've just said is not just some sort of formal language you've come up with. That is actually how they've announced it, isn't it? The Prime Minister's asked the Foreign Secretary to withdraw the ambassador. Yeah.
I don't know the detailed formality of this, but it is clearly an ambassador is an appointment of the Foreign Office, but the Prime Minister, I think, has the overall say or the final say on these big jobs, and so that is how the announcement has been made. I was on Good Morning Britain this morning presenting. We had a new minister, Mike Tapp, who did a really good job trying to defend a very, very tenuous position, because overnight Keir Starmer was still saying he had full confidence in Peter Mandelson, but all the papers were saying that he was clinging on by a thread on the brink. Yesterday at Prime Minister's Questions, Kemi Badenoch really put pressure on Keir Starmer over the original appointment to appoint Peter Mandelson to this ambassador's job back in the beginning of the year, and whether Keir Starmer had followed full proper process and knew all the information about the Peter Mandelson relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, which is what has brought him down. And the explanation, I think we're seeing this morning from the government, is that, in fact, they didn't have the full information about the nature of Peter Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein at the time they made the appointment. That's how they're going to explain it. And I'm afraid the emails yesterday, Peter was sent a big batch of emails disclosed through the court process in America by Bloomberg. He obviously was, I guess not surprised, but pretty appalled these were about to come into the public domain. He did an interview yesterday with the Sun newspaper, with Harry Cole, on their television channel out of Washington, where he explains his huge upset, his regret that this guy Epstein, he was deceived by him. He was like something on his shoe, an albatross around his neck. But I'm afraid the emails were just so devastating for Peter at a time when a sex offender has been not just charged but convicted and is about to being sentenced. Peter was sending emails saying, sending love, saying that that he had to be strong, that he needed to be got out of prison as soon as possible. His friends still loved him, and I'm afraid Peter will, to his grave, regret deeply the sending of those emails, because they were so disastrous in the public domain that, even though it's a long time ago, it was just untenable for such a senior public servant to have sent and defend the sending of those emails. And of course, the fear was there was even more to come, but the ones which were in the public domain were devastating.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The government themselves in the announcement cite, in particular, Peter Mandelson's suggestion that Jeffrey Epstein's first conviction was wrongful and should be challenged is new information. And that was not known at the time of his appointment. So it was not, in fact, the kind of lobbying Tony Blair, who was then the Prime Minister, to meet him. That was not the kind of fatal, whatever it is, fatal blow.
And that was before he was charged or convicted. So that had happened 6 years earlier.
Yeah.
It's the things which happened in 2008 after the legal process is a long way down the track, where Peter is continuing to support and defend and champion. That is where it becomes terrible.
And it's it's similar in that respect to Prince Andrew as well, isn't it? Who kind of continues the relationship with Epstein after the conviction. I think, if you were doing a quick anatomy of a scandal and an anatomy of how government thinks about problems, when you've got one of these things on your plate as a Prime Minister, I think the considerations are these. First of all, how expendable is this person? What's the cost to me of getting rid of this person? Angela Rayner, very difficult, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party in my cabinet. But, the ambassador to America, yes, my personal appointment, Peter Mandelson an unusual choice, not a career diplomat. But nevertheless, you can get yourself another ambassador. So, and Mandelson comes with no kind of political clout that is going to be a problem for you. So, I think in these things, you always think, how expendable, how easy is it for me to get rid of this person? Second, you think, can this person lie low and will this scandal go away? Answer no, partly because the Epstein case is, of course, incredibly newsworthy and we should say awful and tragic. And there's no end in sight. And you've got the state visit coming up next week, which the British ambassador is going to be very deeply involved in, because that's what ambassadors do on state visits. They're at all the events and all the meetings and so on. So there's no easy way of shutting it down. And then the third thing, which actually relates a bit to the Rayner conversation we had last week, is do we know everything anyway? Do we know everything that's going to come out? The first thing in Downing Street you should always do is say, I want to know absolutely everything, and I don't want to take anyone's word for it. I'm going to get, my trusted person in Downing Street to investigate this and get all the information. And in this case, they would have concluded, like, we can't possibly know all the things that are going to come out. In fact, Peter is himself suggesting more is going to come out. So for all those reasons, it was pretty clear overnight, wasn't it, that I definitely thought, I'm not just saying this kind of after the event, I thought he would not survive. It begs the question, obviously, like, who are they going to put in place next? And do they go on trying to find, and, I know, as you alluded to, I was considered for the role last year. Do you find a kind of political appointment, a sort of unusual choice, or do you now go for a kind of career diplomat, in which case you lose some of the things that Peter Mandelson undoubtedly brought to the job? Because I will say this, I think he was doing the job exceptionally well. And I think he had made the move to the role of ambassador, and I think he had brought something special, and I think he had made a connection to the Trump White House, which is obviously an unusual place to deal with, in a way that probably, you don't know for certain, but probably a career diplomat would not have been able to do.
I think the first thing to say is, on a personal level, this is just such a tragedy for Peter. The third time that a prime minister and his spokesperson has had to announce Peter's removal from government. It happened twice when he was a cabinet minister, and it's tough because I take at face value. I absolutely believe his deep remorse and regret for the relationship he struck up, and the emails and the communications he had. And there was always something about Peter. He was a bit of an Icarus figure, and he sailed close to, in this case, a dangerous sun. In the case of Epstein, but he will be so kicking himself, and I think he will also know that in retrospect, when this wasn't all in the public domain, to have taken this job was a mistake, and Keir Starmer will be kicking himself that he and his team didn't have all of the information in front of them. But I feel sad and upset for Peter, because I think he is somebody who has good values and has a commitment to public service, which has been there since his campaigning for youth unemployment in the late 1970s. And so I feel kind of bad for that. And the second thing, you're totally right. It is it's a blow, because he was doing a good job in such complicated situation, trying to deal with this Trump White House. And it did require an unusual figure, somebody who was willing to take risks, and who had that extra ability to reach out and make connections. And at a time when the world is so unstable in foreign affairs terms, but also where our economic relationship with America is so tenuous and so on a knife edge, Peter was trying his best to do a good job. And so I think that is a loss. Very hard to replace him. But then the third thing is, this state visit was a nightmare. I mean, on the one hand, people were saying, well, does it make it very hard for Keir Starmer to remove Peter Mandelson a few days before the state visit, given that Donald Trump is also implicated in all this relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and the allegations against him. He was also in the birthday book, it is alleged, although, of course, he's suing the Wall Street Journal and saying it wasn't him. This wasn't his rather lurid drawing. On the other hand, if you take the events of next week with the state visit coming up, the press conference Keir Starmer would be doing with Donald Trump, I think, absent the Peter Mandelson issue, if that wasn't kind of on the table at all, it'd be very hard for the political editor of the BBC to raise with Donald Trump at a press conference in the UK. The question of Donald Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, while Peter Mandelson was in a media storm over the very same issues, it was going to dominate the whole of this visit. And I think, in the end, saying, Peter has stepped down because of an issue about what he revealed, and we will not allow this media storm to get in the way of the hugely important economic and foreign policy bilateral and multilateral issues which Britain and America need to be talking about in the coming days on this state visit. That is a better way to handle this and to allow it to dominate the whole summit. So I agree with you that overnight it was clear Peter was going to have to go, and he was going to have to go because the idea that this could be allowed to run between now and next Wednesday, Thursday was just impossible. And also, as you know, George, when you're making these decisions, you either have to see it through for months or you want to make a decision quickly. The absolute worst place for Keir Starmer would have been to fight this off all day Friday as the growing clamour of people saying these emails are unacceptable, it's shocking, and then find out there was some new revelation in Sunday's newspapers, and then you have to do another U-turn. Rishi Sunak got into terrible trouble with doing that. I think in the case of Angela Rayner, Keir Starmer did it the right way. Get the independent review, quick report, quick decision. He couldn't afford to allow this to run through the weekend if he was then going to have to make the decision he's now made on Thursday morning.
Yeah, agree with all of that. And of course, this is a government that wanted this September to have a kind of reset and a relaunch effectively and focus on delivery. And, if you think about it, it's been dominated by kind of personnel issues, if you like. What about the state visit? We should just say, obviously, in some ways, the purpose of the state visit has already been served, i.e., Donald Trump was offered a state visit. You remember Keir Starmer produced the letter from the King in his bilateral in the West Wing of the White House. And as a result, Britain got a trade deal, which, and this is to Peter's credit, but also the team in Downing Street and the Prime Minister's credit, looks compared to all the other countries of the world like a very good deal. It's Britain's got the best deal, and other countries like India are in, having a really tough time at the moment in terms of their trying to land an agreement with the United States. So in some ways, the sort of state visit has already achieved what it was designed to achieve, which is cement a warm relationship and a working relationship. But what about, it's interesting if you're the Prime Minister, what would be your priority? There's lots to discuss. There's obviously Gaza, Middle East, Israel strike on Qatar, which we could have talked about today. But, there's a lot of pressure on Keir Starmer on from his own party on Gaza. But, is it a bit of a waste of your time and effort trying to lobby Donald Trump on this? You're actually going to be a voice that's heard on it. Ukraine, clearly very important, disrupted Keir Starmer's summer, and that's all up in the air. So I imagine that will be an important issue. But if I was them in Downing Street now, I'd still be kind of going back to the economic issues that are so central to this government's political success and indeed our, all of our prosperity. And I know that Peter was working on a sort of tech alliance between the UK and the US and an AI alliance and getting these US tech companies to do more in the UK and, get the pretty good industry we have here in that space working more closely with the American market. So hopefully that does not finish with his career as an ambassador. And that can be something that's achieved at this state visit. Certainly I would, very important as the foreign policy issues are, still, getting the British economy moving and tying ourselves to something of what's happening in the United States in terms of the improvements in productivity and growth there is really critical.
Look, let's hope they can make progress on that economic agreement. As you know, in these kind of international discussions, personnel matters. And on that subject, it's not only Peter Mandelson who's not only not holding the ring as the ambassador. There's also a new foreign secretary, David Lammy, and his 4 years of contacts are now in the Justice Department. There's a new business secretary. He's moved over from the tech department, Peter Kyle. There's also a new tech secretary, Liz Kendall, who was the welfare minister before. So whole load of new people who've got to get their heads
Mm.
around the discussions which have gone on, and I know some of them have been quite contentious, but hopefully they can make some progress on the foreign policy side. Again, this is very, very delicate. The UN meeting the week after the state visit, expectation that the UK, in the form of Keir Starmer, I think it's likely he'll be there, I guess, recognising the state of Palestine, a controversial subject in the relationship between Britain and America. So I think actually, if you're Keir Starmer, what you want most of all goes back to your starting point. The purpose of this visit was to have a smooth and a narrowly defined state visit in which Donald Trump and his wife Melania can do some visits and go to Windsor and meet the King and make a speech and feel as though their relationship bilaterally with the UK is important, and with the monarch as well as the Prime Minister. And what you don't really want it to do is be overshadowed by scandal or policy row. And if you can get through that in a way which feels like it was substantive and enjoyable for Donald Trump, maybe that will bode well for some of the tougher discussions to happen in the months ahead. I'd be surprised now if they are sealing deals in the coming days on tech and the economy. But maybe they're much more advanced than we realise.